Hello everyone, welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we will explore an emotional story about liberation and triumph after facing a tense situation. The story I'm sharing today will certainly take you through a journey full of surprises and touching moments. It begins with a very sudden decision, one that wasn't easy at all, the decision to move out and take all my belongings. But it wasn't just ordinary items, it was things that held deep personal value and memories. These items included curtains I carefully selected to match my living space, a rug I loved for its cozy feel, toys I had chosen thoughtfully for my pet, and even a cat tower I built with my mom, a gift full of love and sentiment. This action was not just about leaving, it was a strong, purposeful response. It wasn't a quiet departure, but a turning point in my life, a way for me to assert my autonomy and determination. When I decided to take everything that was mine, I not only created an empty space in the house but also made the house feel like it had lost its identity, as all that I had built and connected with was no longer there. This act was like a definitive end to the relationships I had tried to maintain, while also affirming that I no longer wanted to be a part of that space. The house, which had once been a place I lived and bonded with, was now almost empty, and this caused a huge surprise for my roommates. When they returned, they couldn't believe their eyes as they saw everything had changed completely. Everything they knew, everything that felt familiar, was now just bare walls, with no trace of my presence. They couldn't react quickly enough because everything had happened so fast. This wasn't just a material change, but a mental shift. The presence I once had was now completely gone from their lives, and they couldn't fill that void. This story is not just about liberation, but also a sense of triumph. When facing tense situations and conflicts in relationships, it can feel like you're being pushed into a corner, but this action was my way of reclaiming control over my life. I didn't accept being pushed out, I didn't let anyone dictate my life. This is revenge, but not in a negative way, it's an action that affirms my freedom and self-worth. If you find this story intriguing and filled with deep lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to not miss out on more valuable lessons and inspiring stories. Recently, I discovered something unimaginable, something that turned everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my roommates upside down. I had always considered them as friends, people I could trust in tough times, people I shared my daily life and important moments with. But the truth shocked and hurt me. The roommates I thought were close were secretly trying to push me out of the house we lived in together. This wasn't just a change in how they treated me, but a deliberate act to remove me from the space I considered home, just so one of them could bring her boyfriend into my lease. This betrayal was a huge shock, and the feelings spread within me like a raging storm. At first, I couldn't believe what I was hearing and seeing. How could the people I had lived with for so long, people I shared stories, meals, and even small moments of life with, do this? I had thought our relationship was mutual, a true friendship, yet now they were acting as if I was just a hindrance to their personal plans. When I realized the truth, it felt like the ground beneath me suddenly vanished. They no longer valued me, no longer saw me as a trustworthy friend. Instead, I was just someone occupying their space, someone they wanted to get rid of to serve their own interests. This made me feel disrespected, as if I had no value in their eyes, and that hurt deeply. The words they said about me taking up space, bothering them, or not contributing to the house were no longer just random remarks, but justifications for their actions to push me out. I didn't just feel betrayed, but like I was being treated as a disposable object they wanted to throw away when they no longer needed me. This betrayal not only saddened me, but also forced me to question everything we had. Were all the conversations, the cozy nights together just fake? Or did they really not care about me as I had thought? These questions haunted my mind, leaving me with no rational explanation. It felt like I had been deceived, and from now on, I couldn't trust anyone again. This was a hard lesson, but also an awakening that not everyone can be called a friend, and not everyone deserves your trust. When I decided to confront this situation and clearly state that I wanted to stay, I never imagined that their reaction would be so strong and hostile. I had thought that, at the very least, we were still roommates, and an open, respectful conversation would be the only way to resolve this tension. But instead of listening and trying to find a solution, they not only refused outright but started deliberately acting in ways to make me feel more and more uncomfortable. Their reaction wasn't a constructive conversation, but a series of subtle and calculated actions. They didn't need to say much, their actions spoke louder than words. The incidents they created around the house seemed like they weren't accidents, but the result of a deliberate strategy: loud noises late at night, disorganized messes in the shared spaces, and cold attitudes every time I tried to interact with them. Everything seemed planned to create a suffocating, tense environment, a space where I no longer felt comfortable. These actions were clearly not outbursts of emotion, but a calculated strategy to make me feel like I no longer had a place in the home I had lived in for so long. It's sad, but I began to feel like they no longer saw me as a friend. Instead, I was just someone they wanted to remove to make space for someone else. Every noise, every disruption felt like a silent message telling me that I was not welcome here. Rather than facing me directly and honestly to address the issue, they chose to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. All of this not only made me feel confused and hurt, but also made me question if I was wrong to decide to stay. I began to clearly sense that they were intentionally creating a space where I could no longer exist. But one thing was clear: all these incidents had one single purpose: to make me feel like I couldn't bear it any longer, to force me to leave. Everything seemed designed to push me to the brink, leaving me with no choice but to give up. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, they would never accept me staying. They had decided that I was no longer needed in their plans, and everything I felt now was their silent but determined resistance to push me out of the space I once called home. Everything finally reached its climax when they decided to hold a meeting that I never could have anticipated. At first, I thought it was just a normal conversation to resolve the issue, something all of us could participate in and work out peacefully. But when the meeting took place, I realized they no longer wanted to hide their attitude. For me, it wasn't a meeting to solve problems, but an event with the sole purpose of confronting me officially, so they could express the dissatisfaction and tension that had been building up for so long. Their attitude had completely changed, and the patience I once trusted in had vanished. Unlike the normal conversations we used to have, they no longer tried to hide their anger. When I walked into that meeting, I could feel the tension in the air, as if every word, every look, was full of judgment and criticism. I knew then that this wasn't about solving problems, but about them attacking me head-on, and I couldn't escape the feeling of being attacked. As the confrontation unfolded, one of my roommates couldn't hold her composure and had to be restrained by the other as she shouted in my face. I could clearly feel her anger with every word, and when she said, "You hate me, and I'm not welcome in this house," it felt like a punch in the face. Those words weren't just the end of a friendship but the end of the trust one had placed in them. At that moment, I couldn't understand how someone I had once considered a friend could say something like that, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in our relationship. The feeling I had was one of pain and surprise. I never expected things to escalate into such a harsh attack. It wasn't just a direct confrontation, but an attack on my spirit, making me feel belittled and worthless. They didn't just want me to leave, they wanted me to feel like I no longer belonged in this house, as if I was a burden they could no longer carry. Those words made me feel degraded and deeply hurt, and I wondered if I was wrong to trust them. What's worse is not just the hostility, but the way they showed such a lack of respect and contempt. She didn't just ask me to leave, she wanted me to feel the pain, to understand that I was no longer a part of this space. Every word felt like a cut to my heart, making me feel discarded, erased from their lives, like something no longer needed. I wasn't just being kicked out, I was being denied the right to exist in the very home I had lived in for so long. At that moment, I realized that our relationship was beyond saving. This wasn't a small incident, it was the complete breakdown of a friendship, a betrayal I couldn't accept. Everything I had once trusted in them, every hope I had for a good relationship, was now shattered. And what hurt the most was that there was no regret or reflection from their side. They had decided that I was no longer a part of their life. They continued to attack, with words aimed directly at me, saying that I hadn't contributed to the house and was just wasting their space. Every word felt like a direct assault on my self-esteem. What hurt me wasn't just the material criticism, But deeper than that, it was the complete denial of my value as a person in this shared space. They weren't just criticizing my actions, they were denying my existence as part of the house, as part of the community we once shared. These words weren't just criticism, but a disregard, treating me like something unnecessary. I began to feel like I was just excess, no longer valuable in their eyes, and it made my heart ache. It felt like I was being placed on a list of things no longer useful, discarded like an old object with no value left. Their words pierced deeply into my mind, making me wonder if I was truly that useless. Was my presence in this house just occupying space, a waste? Every time they mentioned how I hadn't contributed, I felt like I was being judged based on material standards, on external factors I couldn't change. My existence was no longer valued, and I couldn't do anything to change that feeling. However, what really pushed me into a corner with no way out was when they announced that they had contacted the landlord and convinced her not to renew my lease in June. It was a mental shock to me. Not only did they no longer want me to stay, but they had also intervened directly in my rights, trying to impose control over my life. Those words made me feel like I had no place, like everything had been decided before I could resist. I felt like I was being pushed into a dark corner with no escape. I no longer had freedom, no right to decide my future in a space I had once called home. Their words didn't just make me feel discarded, they felt like the complete erasure of every memory and bond one had with this house. It was the feeling of being wiped out, cast aside without mercy. And what was even more painful was the harshness of their actions, with no regret, no reflection on what had happened. Everything felt like a battle with no victory for me, a battle where I had no voice or resistance. When everything seemed irreparably broken, I decided to take action. Everything had crossed the line of what I could tolerate, and I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, I would remain invisible, overwhelmed and controlled by my roommates. At that moment, I felt a powerful surge of energy, a resolute determination that couldn't be denied. There was no hesitation or fear left, I knew exactly what I had to do. The decision to act came as a release. I couldn't continue living in helplessness, enduring their control and pressure without having a voice of my own. I couldn't sit still and allow my roommates to control my life any longer. This wasn't just about the living space, it was about respect and my right to make decisions in my own life. They had tried to infringe upon rights that I should inherently have, and I couldn't let that continue. With each passing day, I felt my freedom being threatened, and I couldn't accept living in a situation where I no longer had control. So, I decided to face the truth and not let them continue influencing me. That was when I realized I had to step out of the darkness and start rebuilding my future on my own. I calmly told them that I would speak directly to the landlord, and when they declared that they were the ones in charge of the house, I simply smiled and went on with my work. At that moment, I no longer felt confused or weak as before. Their words, despite carrying an element of control, no longer made me fear or feel threatened. In fact, it only made me feel an oddly calming sense, as if I was witnessing a confrontation that no longer intimidated me. I smiled softly, not to mock them, but to affirm that I wouldn't be swayed by their words. When they said they were the ones in charge of the house, I realized they were just trying to reclaim power they felt they had lost. But now, I was in control of my life. Their words didn't make me feel scared or pressured, but instead, they only made me feel more steadfast in my decision. Their confident declaration only made me realize they were trying to create an illusion of power. It made me see more clearly that they didn't have the right to make decisions for me, and I was the one in control of my life. I wasn't dependent on them or their approval. At that moment, I felt more independent than ever before. I found an inner strength to stand up and confront the injustice. They thought they could easily force me, but I wasn't going to let them. Their words felt like a declaration of independence and determination. I wasn't someone who could be oppressed, and I wouldn't let myself become a victim in this story. To me, this wasn't just about resisting oppression, but about asserting my worth and demanding respect. They may have thought they had the power to control everything, but I would prove to them that I wasn't someone easily manipulated. They could try everything to make me feel small, but I wouldn't bow to injustice. I had decided to take control of my life, and they couldn't change that. The conversation with the landlord went differently than I had expected, but it became a release. When I entered the meeting, I didn't know what awaited me. Contrary to my worries and expectations, the conversation didn't unfold as I had imagined. I didn't know whether I would receive support or rejection from the landlord, but I knew that this was an opportunity for me to find a way out of this difficult situation. Despite all the tension beforehand, this meeting opened a new door, bringing me a sense of relief and freedom I never expected. When I spoke with the landlord, she acknowledged that my roommates had gone too far. The moment I heard her admit this, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. It felt like all the pressure and tension I had been carrying for so long was finally released. I no longer had to fight alone against my roommates. The landlord's acknowledgement that their actions had crossed the line made me feel validated. That feeling was truly wonderful. It was as if I was no longer the only one seeing this problem, and I no longer had to face it alone. This made me feel recognized and no longer isolated in this battle. Even though I had tried to be patient and do everything I could, the lack of recognition from those around me had made me feel powerless. The landlord's admission of my roommate's wrongdoings and her refusal to stay silent felt like a boost for me, a confirmation that what I had been through was justified. I felt like I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had the support of the landlord, someone who could make important decisions. Although the landlord had given them the authority to decide whether to renew my lease, she also gave me an opportunity to regain control. Even though the landlord had given my roommates the power to decide about renewing my lease, her flexibility in her decision showed me something. She didn't want me to feel completely oppressed. She didn't want my roommates' power to continue controlling me. By giving me a clear choice, allowing me to decide my future, even if I wouldn't stay in that house, was a very empowering act. I felt that in this struggle, I could still grasp my autonomy. She told me I could move out anytime without having to pay rent for the days I wouldn't be there. These words were a push toward freedom and release. Finally, I was no longer tied to a lease that no longer suited me. The fact that the landlord allowed me to leave without worrying about additional costs made me feel relieved. This wasn't just a material choice, it was an affirmation that I wasn't stuck in a situation with no way out. It showed me that I had the right to decide my future, not forced by external circumstances. Her words were a confirmation of my freedom. I no longer had to live in a tense and conflicted environment. Truly, for me, this was a crucial moment, a time when I felt freed from a mental burden. I no longer had to endure the tension and constant conflicts in that house. The living environment, which should have been a place of safety and relaxation, was no longer a place I wanted to return to. With the landlord's words, I felt like I had regained control of my life, and that was something invaluable. The story was no longer about struggling to exist in a tense relationship, but a new beginning, a free step, no longer bound by the past. Yesterday, when both of my roommates went to visit their family, they are sisters, I didn't waste any time. At that moment, I felt like I had no other choice but to take action immediately. Everything had come to a head, and I knew that if I didn't act decisively right then, I would let the situation continue for another day. Knowing that my roommates wouldn't be home until the next day, I felt like this was my only chance to really take control of my life. It felt like a moment I had been waiting for all along, the moment to finally break free from the toxic relationship and stand up for myself. Knowing they wouldn't be home until the next day, I decided to act immediately. The decision to move out wasn't a rash one, but the result of days of reflection and maturity. I knew clearly that I couldn't live in an environment where I was manipulated and disrespected anymore. Time was no longer a factor that could delay this decision. I didn't want to keep living in suffering any longer. So, I decided not to let a single minute pass without doing what was necessary to change the situation. I immediately called everyone I knew for help and started moving my belongings out of the house. For me, calling my friends for help wasn't just a practical move, but also a strategic step. I knew I couldn't do it alone, and the support of my close friends not only helped me get the job done, but also gave me the sense that I wasn't alone in this fight. These are the people who understand me, those who are willing to stand by me in this situation. Each call wasn't just a request for help, but a reminder of relationships, friendship, and mutual support in tough times. The items weren't just material things, but memories and my connection to the space. Every item I took with me had its own story. It wasn't just about the things, they were parts of me, marks of the time I spent in that house. Each curtain, each rug, contained memories of peaceful mornings, moments when I felt I truly belonged there. These items weren't just material possessions, but the connection, the pieces of a space that had once been my home. I could feel the attachment to every little detail in that space, the things that had contributed to creating the picture of my life over the past time. I took with me the curtains I had carefully chosen to create a cozy space for myself, the rug I loved for its comfort, the cat toys I had collected for my pet to play with, and even the cat tower I had made with my mom, a gift full of meaning and affection. Each item carried a part of my soul. The curtains weren't just decorations, but symbols of the days I spent nurturing my living space. The rug was where I found peace, the comfort I felt when stepping into the house after a long day. The cat toys weren't just for my pet, but proof of the love I had for the small creatures in my life. Especially the cat tower I made with my mom, it wasn't just a physical item, but a priceless memory, a connection with family, with love and values I always cherish. These items weren't just possessions, but parts of me, parts of my life story. I realized that in this life, things are not just things we use, but they are parts of the stories we tell. Each item is connected to memories, important moments, relationships that have passed and still remain in our minds. When I took them, I wasn't just taking material things, I was taking a piece of my life, a piece of me. Those things carry the marks of emotions, moments, and important decisions on my life journey. After clearing everything out, I couldn't help but feel a special sense of satisfaction. For me, it wasn't just about cleaning up the space, it was an act with deeper meaning. This sense of satisfaction didn't come from removing the belongings, but from the fact that I had regained control of my life. Everything had been rearranged the way I wanted it, no one could manipulate or influence my decisions anymore. This satisfaction felt like I had completed an important milestone in my life, a clear separation from the stressful and disrespectful environment. Clearing everything out wasn't just a physical act, it was a mental release. I had created a new space, a space where I could live on my own terms, without worrying about the negative effects from others. I took all of their things off my shelves and furniture, and piled them up in the living room. This action wasn't about revenge or just to cause harm. In fact, it was a way for me to assert my independence and determination. Their belongings were no longer allowed to occupy my space. The shelves and furniture I had once shared with them were now empty, leaving behind only a trace of change. Piling their things on top of each other was a symbolic act, showing that I no longer accepted control or negative influence from them. I wasn't just moving my stuff, I was clearing out everything I didn't want to keep, like erasing a sad chapter in my life. Immediately, the house we had shared all this time was now nearly empty, with no trace of me left. When everything was cleared out, this house became an entirely different space. It used to be where I built memories, where I felt I belonged. But now, that emptiness felt like a reminder of how I had left behind everything that no longer held value for me. This change was my way of showing that I was no longer a part of that space, but more than that, I was creating a new space, one where I would find freedom and a sense of safety. That emptiness was a symbol of rebirth, a new beginning that I would build from scratch. That emptiness was a testament to the change I had made. It wasn't just the emptiness of the physical space, but this absence reflected a deep inner transformation. I no longer felt pressured or dependent on my roommates. This change was proof of the power of the decision I had made. I didn't let myself be overwhelmed by negativity. Instead, I took action and completely changed the situation. The house was no longer a place I had to endure, but a place where I regained my strength. The things I removed were a declaration that I would not allow myself to be bound by the past or by unfavorable situations. To keep a memory of that day, I took pictures of everything, from the items that had been removed to the empty space, all of it reflecting my strong and irreversible decision. Taking pictures was a meaningful act. It wasn't just about capturing the physical space but also a way for me to preserve an important moment in my life. These photos were proof of my decisiveness, of the change I had made. Each photo didn't just capture the scene, but also contained emotions, marking an unchangeable decision. It was my memory of how I dared to stand up, dared to change, and dared to leave behind what no longer suited me. Finally, I handed the keys to the landlord and left without hesitation. This was a final act, an end to a difficult phase, but also the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I wasn't leaving just because I didn't want to stay, but because I wanted freedom. I wanted to find peace for myself. My roommates would have to face the consequences of their actions, and I could move forward with a sense of liberation. They wouldn't be back until tomorrow, and I knew I had enough time to prepare for this moment. While they were away, I decisively acted without hesitation. To avoid enduring angry messages or attacks I knew would certainly come from them, I blocked them on all communication platforms. I didn't want to receive any more messages from them either physically or emotionally, because I knew they wouldn't understand the reasons behind what I was doing. Their anger and sense of betrayal would make them criticize me, but I no longer cared. I had firmly chosen the path of avoidance, because I knew that it was too late to fix anything now. I imagined that when they returned and saw the house almost empty, the expression on their faces would be priceless. It would be a combination of surprise, anger, and perhaps a little regret. The house they thought they still had control over was no longer theirs. The furniture and belongings worth hundreds of dollars, the things they had considered part of their living space, had been taken away. The living room was now left with only empty walls, with no trace of my presence. They wouldn't be able to imagine the sight until they saw it with their own eyes. And when they realized I had taken everything I had built, they would understand that I was no longer a part of their lives. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about asserting that I had the strength to no longer be bound by unhealthy relationships. Now, I really didn't contribute anything to the house anymore, as they had once said. Contrary to what they had previously judged about me not contributing, I had proven to them that I could leave without waiting for their permission. No longer was my presence in the house, no longer were my belongings taking up space, and they would have to face the emptiness I had left behind. They would also have to face the reality that I wasn't the only one who needed to be in this space. Their words had now become true, but not in the way they had expected. Now, their responsibility is to find someone to take over my lease until their boyfriend can move in June. They won't find it easy to find a replacement in such a short time. And if they can't, they will have to take responsibility for paying rent in my place. This is not only a financial price but also a confrontation with the consequences of their earlier thoughtless actions. They will realize that what they did didn't only affect me, but also affected them. Their disrespect and coercive actions led to an outcome they couldn't control. With every passing minute, I feel freer, and I know that this is the first step toward finding peace for myself. What they will face when they return will be only a small part of the journey I've started, a journey of rediscovering myself and not allowing anyone to diminish my worth. It feels pretty amazing. In the end, I realize that sometimes change doesn't come from big decisions, but from small yet meaningful actions. Moving out and taking back control of my life not only helped me escape the control of others but also provided an opportunity to affirm my self-worth, respect myself, and not accept disrespect from anyone. The important lesson I've learned is, never let anyone or any circumstance blur the freedom and peace of mind you deserve. When faced with negativity or conflict, instead of staying silent or enduring, take strong and decisive action. Sometimes, leaving and starting anew is necessary to rediscover yourself and rebuild what's worthy of you. Never let yourself fall into a situation where you have to accept disrespect from others, whether they are friends or people you live with in shared spaces. Sometimes, to protect your peace and self-worth, you must be strong and decisive, even when it means making difficult decisions. Remember that you deserve to live in an environment of respect and love, and you don't have to accept manipulation or pressure from anyone. Leaving may be the start of a new chapter, but more importantly, it shows that you know how to put yourself first and not let anyone make you feel like a burden. Stay confident in yourself, courageously face challenges, and always remember that the greatest power is the ability to make decisions about your own life.